Story 1. The Boat Intruders. That year I went fishing with my brother-in-law Jack, a few of his friends, and my sister. Jack came from a well-to-do family and had always had an easy life, which my sister enjoyed after they got married. We set sail early in the morning from his fancy house on the bay on a boat named Lexi after my sister. A few hours into the trip, Jack had only caught one largemouth perch. Of course, we were all drunk. I was only 17, and my sister kept nagging me not to drink. The sky turned a beautiful orange as the sun began to set. Jack started grilling burgers, although we had caught 3 fish, which seemed strange, but I was fine with it. By the time we finished eating, it was dark. There was something both calming and unsettling about being in the middle of the ocean at night. Jack and his friends were drunk, playing music and laughing. They invited me to play cards against humanity, and I did. I grabbed a beer from the bar, thinking no one would notice. Suddenly, through the fading music, I heard noises outside. Turning off the music, I heard 2 men calling for help. We all ran to the side of the boat. 2 men on a smaller boat looked up at us, saying they were out of food and gas. Jack staggered and told them to wait while he got a ladder. Although I was nervous, I helped Jack carry the ladder to shore. The 2 men climbed aboard, thanking us. They devoured the leftover sandwiches and took a full can of gas. After they left, we all went to bed, although I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I woke up to go to the bathroom. Stepping outside, I heard the faint sound of the boat's engine. Turning on the headlights, I saw their boat approaching. Just then, I heard a scream of terror from inside. Running back, I found one of Jack's friends shaking, saying he saw figures standing over him. We searched the boat, but found nothing. The men were gone, along with a few cans of gasoline in Jack's wallet and keys. We rushed back to Jack's house, arriving 4 hours later. He used a spare key to get in, and they changed the locks the next day. A few weeks later, their camera system caught 2 hooded men trying to unlock the front door, but couldn't. We were 99% sure it was them. The fear and paranoia lingered long after. Story 2. The Man on Daryls Pond. There used to be a pond about a half-mile from my old house called Daryls Pond. I still don't know who Daryl was, but no one owned it, so people would fish there from time to time. Usually, though, it was just me. I had a small kayak and a pole stuck in the ground where I would tie it. One afternoon, around 3 p.m., I paddled out to the middle of the pond, which was a good place to catch a good catch. As I was settling in, I saw another guy come out of the trees. I waved and smiled at him. He hopped into a small boat floating on the edge of the pond and started paddling toward me. When he got close enough, I greeted him with a friendly, "Perfect day, huh?" "Yeah, sure," he replied, but then fell silent again. The conversation became awkward, and I began to feel uncomfortable. He kept rowing closer until his boat bumped into mine, making a loud noise. He looked much older, maybe in his late 40s or 50s, while I was only 24. He stared at me with a half smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Trying to break the silence, I asked, "So, are you out here to talk?" "No, I don't actually fish," he said, still staring at me. "Oh, it's never a bad day to relax on the pond?" I replied, trying to keep things light. But he kept looking at me or looking in my direction. My heart started to race. We were surrounded by trees on all sides, right in the middle of the pond. I felt trapped. I decided to row closer to the shore, pretending that I was just trying to find a better spot to fish. To my horror, he began to follow me. "What a beautiful day, huh?" I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. When I was close enough to the edge, I turned to him and said, "I think I should stop here." He was still staring at me, but the smile was gone. "I can't let you go," he said, lifting the flannel to reveal the pistol sticking out of his jeans pocket. Panic rose in me. I jumped out of the boat and swam to shore, running the half-mile uphill through the woods back to the house. I locked every door and window as soon as I got home, pulling down the blinds to look out. As night fell, I turned off all the lights, looked out into the front yard, praying that I wasn't being followed. Just when I thought I was safe, I heard leaves rustling outside the window. I froze. Then a voice said, "Hey, are you up there, trying to sleep?" It was him. I crept down to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and called 911. I whispered into the phone and explained the situation. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived. They searched thoroughly but found nothing. They suggested I stay with a friend or family member for a few days, which I did. I never saw the man again, but I moved away a month later. I couldn't stand the constant fear and paranoia of being watched. Now, I only fish in the bay, where there are always people around. Story 3. A Fisherman's Nightmare. A few years ago, I decided to spend a weekend at Shasta Lake, a remote lake in Northern California that I had heard about from a friend. The lake was tucked away in the wilderness, far from any towns or cities, and was rumored to have some of the best fishing in the state. Eager to try my luck and enjoy the solitude, I packed my gear and headed out early Saturday morning. The trip took several hours, the last leg of the journey being on a narrow dirt road winding through dense forest. I finally reached the lake around noon. The lake was as picturesque as my friend had described it, clear blue water surrounded by tall, dense trees. I pitched my tent in a small clearing near the shore and spent the rest of the day fishing. The fishing was great, and I quickly lost track of time. By the time I realized how late it was, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the water. I decided to call it a day and started packing up. As I pulled the last of my rope, I noticed something strange in the water. A large, dark shape moving just below the surface. At first, I thought it was a large fish, but as it got closer, I realized it was much larger than any fish I had ever seen. The shape moved slowly, almost deliberately, towards the shore where I was standing. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly packed up my things, hurrying back to camp. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I kept hearing strange noises outside my tent, rustling in the bushes, snapping branches, and soft, splashing footsteps near the water surface. Every time I looked out, all I saw was darkness and the stillness of the lake. Unable to sleep, I sat up in my tent, flashlight in hand, listening to the ominous sounds outside. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. My heart raced as I realized whatever was out there was getting closer. I knew I had to leave. I quickly packed up my tent and gear, aiming my flashlight at the surrounding trees. As I rushed to my car, I heard the growl again. Much closer this time, I aimed my flashlight toward the sound and caught a glimpse of something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A pair of glowing yellow eyes staring at me from the darkness. Panic set in, and I ran the rest of the way to my car, threw my things into the back seat, and jumped behind the wheel. I started the engine and sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back. I drove nonstop until I reached the safety of my home in Redding, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I never returned to Shasta Lake, and I never found what was lurking in the water or the woods. To this day, the memory of those glowing eyes haunts me, and I can still hear the low growl echoing in my nightmares. Story 4. Face in the water. I was 21 years old and went fishing for the first time with my 84-year-old grandfather. We drove a long way from our suburban home in Springfield, Illinois, to a remote area in southern Illinois. My grandfather had always fished this remote lake in the Shawnee National Forest, where he consistently caught buckets of fish. He was an avid fisherman, using terms I didn't even understand during the car ride. After turning off the main road and heading down 2 miles of dirt trails, we parked and pulled the small boat through the dense forest. Despite his age, my grandfather was in good shape, while I struggled to keep up. The forest was dense with towering trees and thick brush, with barely any sunlight penetrating the canopy. Eventually, we reached the lake, a hidden gem surrounded by dense forest, and put the boat in the water. My grandfather showed me how to get the line and hook into the water, his movements precise and practiced. He was focused, leaning down as if he saw something in the water. When he didn't answer my question, I went back to fishing. The stillness of the lake was almost eerie, with only the occasional ripple breaking on the surface. After a moment, I glanced back and saw him leaning closer, seemingly concentrating on something. His usually steady hands were shaking slightly, a look of intense concentration on his face. I put my hand on his shoulder, heard a splash. My grandfather pushed something back into the water and yelled for me to row back as fast as I could. His voice was filled with a terror I had never heard before. My heart pounded. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew it was bad. We left the boat and equipment behind and hurried back to the car. He drove like a madman down the trails, the Jeep bouncing violently over the rough terrain. It took him 10 minutes to gather his thoughts enough to he described seeing something in the water, a face approaching the surface, then a hand reaching out to grab him. The look in my grandfather's eyes as he recounted the experience was haunting. My grandfather was a man who had faced many challenges in his life, but this encounter had shaken him to the core. Weeks later, he tried to describe it again, saying it looked off. His hands shook as he spoke, the memory still vivid and terrifying. He said the face was pale, with sunken eyes that seemed to pierce through him, but all he knew for sure was that it wasn't a fish. The fear in his eyes and voice convinced me it was something much more sinister. That was the last time we went fishing there. The image of my grandfather, a man who had always been my rock, becoming so terrifying remained with me. The Shawnee National Forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, now held a dark, ominous presence in my mind. I often wondered what we had encountered that day, but I knew I would never return to find out.